your purpose and your brand relates to someone in a very different way than your competitor, then you're always going to win. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the Making of a Nobody. My name is Andy Walsh, SVP of Incubation at Nobody Studios. Welcome to today's episode. Today, Sajal is not here, so I'll be running the host duties alongside Mr. Mark S. McNally, Chief Nobody. Welcome, Mark.
Hey, man.
Before we jump in today's topic, Mark, around paid media, I'd love to sort of get a read straight off the bat as far as right now, there's lots of talk about the industry being more buoyant, investment coming back, and I sort of want to set the tone as far as for founders out there and even investors, sort of what you see the next few months looking like.
Yeah, we're talking about investment appetite overall.
Yeah, I'm seeing like lots of good data, positive data that there's a bit more money being spent back into the startup world and the trends of the last 6 months changing.
I think, look, you can make some generalizations. I do believe it's been stingy for a few years. It's been a while, but I actually think it's been a byproduct of the fact that there was a really hyper frothy market for a couple of years where people are over investing, meaning driving valuations super high, right? Mm-hmm. If you look at the coldness of the last 12 to 18 months, it's not because there's lack of capital, right? The VC funds have plenty of capital. They have more capital than they know what to do with. So if they have a chance to bring things back down to what's favorable for them, all they have to do is collectively decide they're not going to write checks, and the market has to adjust to it. And so it's literally one way or the other. The market, the VC is writing checks and they're all fighting for each other, or they all collectively say, whoa, things have got out of hand. Let's pull back. And I just think that, I won't say collusion, but there's something like that. I do believe the market has celebrated a little bit of the pullback, and there's no real reason for it. I think there's been a number of unicorns that have gone through a lot of struggles. There's a lot of great companies that are raising money as they should, but at more realistic valuations. Unfortunately, the byproduct is there's the earliest stage companies still struggle. And I think that's one of the things that is most missing in the market. It's one of the reasons why we started Nobody Studios. I think the earliest stage, biggest bets, grabbing something from a whiteboard and trying to invest enough to prove that it could work. That is the hardest part of this entire market. And I love the VC. I always say venture studios, like our brethren, we're the ones that are like a mix of like a VC and founders. We're going to lean into stuff. We're going to be bold. We're going to make bets. We're going to be wrong sometimes. But we have this passion to bring something to life. But as soon as we prove it, we don't believe that scale capital is what makes us unique. The VC world that's out there, it's well established for 30 years. There's some amazing people with way more capital than I would ever want to have. So as long as we get the companies built and validated, the VC network will be there to fund them. And we're just trying to be an important part of that ecosystem.
Yeah, nice. And there's a reason why I set the conversation up today with that question. I think right now, as far as the pressure on founders for fundraising, I think to your point, there's still plenty of money there. It's just the way that that's being assessed. And for me, the topic today we're going to cover is around paid media. And there's a real focus with startups around paid media, and pending what stage you're at as a business, the role that it plays changes obviously quite a fair bit based upon whether you have a brand that or product in market versus if you're at a Series C level and you're trying to consolidate market or maybe prepare for an IPO. But today, what I really want to tackle is like the almost sort of reliance or addiction that startups have on paid media. I guess as a question around if you're struggling to get finance, but you're also looking to get momentum from a revenue perspective, which is critical to get investment at the moment, seems to be one of the top things that VCs are looking at as far as your runway from a recurring revenue or just straight revenue. So as far as paid media, a question that I have for you, like, are people too over-reliant on paid media in startups to get revenue coming in? And how do you, I guess, second part of that question, how do you make sure that you're assessing it in the right way?
Yeah, great question. I put paid media in this bucket of like traffic generation. What you're trying to do with any company is saying, I think I have something that's valuable. I think it's the right price point. I think I have the messaging right. But if there's a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a noise? Like the only thing that matters is that people see that. Now, then I switched into our job is to get traffic. Our job is to get eyeballs. Paid media is only one of the tools you have in your toolbox. And for folks that are just listening in, paid media is I'm going to pay to put this banner ad in front of this person's eyeballs on this channel, right?
Yeah.
It's rational. You could also do paid media saying, I want this ad to be in this newsletter, but this newsletter is 99% match with my customer target audience. I would remove paid media from the conversation a little bit, right, Andy? I think every startup has to say, I know I have the message and the pricing, or I think I do, right? And I need enough traffic to validate whether or not what I thought was right is being validated by purchases. So what you care about is traffic. And a lot of what you can learn in paid media, I don't care if you spend $100 or you spend $100,000. If you're good at paid media, you're making bets on certain messages. You're making bet on certain creatives. You're looking for validation, and it's empirical. I know I spent X amount and got this conversion rate. You can do the math. This is what it's going to lead to in terms of sales. Is that profitable or not? If it's not profitable, you might still make a choice to do it because you're building brand, right? But you need to have that empirical evidence and that data to understand if this is something you should keep doing. Now, we live in a world of social today.
Mm-hmm.
So you might spend $5,000 on paid media to learn, because you know why? You can click a button and you're going to be in front of their face. But now you can learn, did that messaging work? Did that creative work? Whatever. Now, if you can turn that into a social broadcast, you have influencers or you have someone else part of the company that can get this out in front of people. It's free, right? Or maybe you have an influencer deal. I don't know. But it's a very low cost broadcast mechanism. But what you did is you used paid media to validate your messaging, your creative. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that it sets up perfectly where I want to go with this conversation. So if you're an early stage startup, right, you may be doing small tests, and you called it out, it could be $100. And part of that, it's not necessarily going to drive revenue, but it does give you some foundation data. So if you're a business and you've just launched a beta product and you're very early in your life stage, so let's dig into that a little bit. So what would be an approach that you could use at a really low touch spend, like $100? You might do 5 bursts of $100, and each time, like, what would that look like as far as testing the messaging and conversion and trying to get a read to get confidence to take it to something which is a bit more significant from a spend perspective?
If I'm just going to put my paid media hat on, what you're trying to do is get to a profitability, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you might spend, just making numbers up, right? But if you spend $1 to get someone to come to your site, and 1% of them are going to convert, you spend $100 to get to one customer. If you're selling a $20 product, you're screwed, right? So you have to do that basic math. Paid media gives you that chance to work out the math. Don't think of it as one experiment. Think of it as like 20 experiments. Maybe it was the creative. Maybe it was the messaging. It depends on the product. I certainly have companies in our portfolio where I'm like, there's 3 or 4 different ways to pitch this.
Yep.
There's 3 or 4 different potential customers. So what you're trying to do is massage through that. You're trying to see, I have an opinion, but let's make some bets, the best ones we can, and see what the data tells us. There are other companies that we have in the portfolio where I'm like, the message doesn't change. It's 100% this, and the target audience is 100% that. In that case, great. You're then maybe working through messaging a little bit and creative a little bit, but you're just trying to validate it. Paid media gives you the chance to say, right now I can say push a button and I'll know something tomorrow. Social doesn't give you that. So that's the way I think about it, is like, use the experimentation. Now, where does it scale? If you spend 20 cents to make $5, how often are you going to do that? As much as possible, right?
Yeah.
So you're trying to get to a profitable acquisition mechanism, but doesn't have to be that on day one, right?
Yeah.
You can lose a lot of money trying to figure things out, just to be clear. But once you're like, this is a no-brainer. I spend $3 and I just made $40 in profit. You do that all day long. You just flip up. I always tell people, like, once you got to a profitable model, paid media is free. It's paying for itself.
Yeah. debate I've seen this year around programmatic and trying to rationalize whether it works or not, which is typically your cheapest sort of mass reach media approach versus other end. You talked about social media where you can really hone in on certain segments and targets, etc. So you've got the full sort of mix there. Fast forward to a point where, say, you understand your customer base, you've had good traction, you might be post Series A. At this point here, you're trying to not only gain market share and grow revenue, but you're also building your brand. And like obviously a passionate brand person. And if you look at some case studies in the last few years, and everyone sort of talks to, again, Airbnb, who doubled down very much on the aspirational brand story because their brand awareness was at a pretty high level. And I think most startups face the challenge of building their brand while also trying to build revenue at the same time, which can be tough, right? Like it's trying to educate people on who you are, what you stand for, and have that message that sticks. And I'm wondering, like, on that sort of journey as you build out, like, what sort of advice, and like, even if we're to look at like internally within like we have a Valify, one of our portfolio companies, we're at a point now where we've gone through a really sort of deliberate 3-month program of validating target audience, like you talked about, testing messaging to be able to get to a point where we're moving forwards. But now we sort of reached this fork where we need to build the Valify brand and make sure that it resonates, but we also need to grow revenue at the same time. So let's park our paid media hat, like looking at building brand. Like you talked about influencers, like what sort of tactics could a startup start to look at as far as how you get to a brand famous, which in brand fame is obviously the utopian world in a startup. So people know you beyond you having to tell them what you do.
You know, I can only say that we have leaned into social. I don't think we excel at it, to be honest. I mean, people tell me we do, but I think there's a different level. There's a different gear we'll hopefully get to at some point, right? But we do have a lot of followers, and we share openly about the things we're working on. And so people are engaged. And I think that's served us. So I can say 4 years into this, I joined a call, I think Tuesday or Wednesday this week, with a very large investor, somebody that I would love to have a partnership with. And usually we've got the monologue to share our story. She led with the first 5 minutes of her story, which I was grateful for. But the way she positioned it was one of those moments where you realize all the effort you put into things are probably worth it. She said, I care about the space a lot. I have determined that venture studios, I'm going to pick one to go really deep on. I've made that decision like a year and a half ago. And I've been following you guys for a long time. And she happened to connect with someone else in the network. And she's like, I met this person who said they were an investor in the studio and was willing to make an introduction to you. And I was so thrilled. I'm humble enough to say thank you for that. But it was more of an indication of she had heard about us. She had watched us. This person has unlimited funds. She'd watched our posts. She had an opinion about us, what we stood for, who we think we're going to become, right? And so walking into that conversation was a distinctly different conversation that I would have had 4 years ago. But what did we do? We did nothing but just share who we are and what we're trying to accomplish. And we created that opinion on her, right? And I didn't have to share with her much about our overall DNA or our thesis, because she's like, yeah, no, I get you guys. I get you. I understand. Again, I don't know what that means. It's unquantifiable, but it's definitely a change from where we started. And it is the kind of thing that, I think startups get to benefit from if they invest early on sharing openly about their story, what they care about. Eventually they'll have a call like that where someone's like, no, I've heard all about you guys. I love you. Let's talk. And it just takes you to like stage 5 versus stage 1.
Yeah, you've articulated that really well. And I think that the example of having, and what I'm sort of like interpreting from what you've said there is that purpose and mission and vision and those core things that you stand for as a business, like we talk about that a lot in Nobody Studios, and the content we share, the stories we have here on making of a nobody, the team, that's consistent, right? And the crowd that we have around the globe is large as far as people that have invested and are committed to our business. And I think that the fact that you hear someone come back to you who's watched that journey and articulate to you what we stand for is always humbling first and foremost, but it demonstrates that if you're a young startup and you're not thinking about your brand and how you articulate who you are, like revenue is not always the marker of success, right? Like it can be a false number in some categories particularly. And I think for me, like the power of brand is so powerful, particularly when you get to later stage and you may be competing with someone in the same category. Like brand and what you stand for, if the product's the same, but your purpose and your brand relates to someone in a very different way than your competitor, then you're always going to win. That's that sort of front of mind consideration. And like everyone talks about Liquid Death as someone that went in and, and that came out of a venture studio, right, too, worth calling out. But Liquid Death went in and it does flavored seltzer water, just like so many brands before it, but they were very distinct on their purpose, their audience, and have created a market for themselves and created a $1 billion company. So I think that thinking about that, and my advice to a startup in that situation would be like never be shy about sharing your story, but make sure that within the founding team and all the staff that they know what that is. That if they spend 10 seconds in an elevator, and I'm going to ask you a question here. This is a setup for you, Mark. But if you spend 10 seconds in an elevator with someone, they should be able to come out of that elevator and tell someone else what you do and what your business stands for. But if you spend more time and you're at a social event, you should be able to have a 10-minute conversation and go through that. And it takes me back to a great analogy, which I'd love you to share so I don't make a mess of it, which is basically you don't know when the person in the elevator you're talking to is going to get off. And I love that as far as a framework for someone to think about, like, how do you add layers of context to your company and what you stand for?
I thought you might be going there. Yeah, literally the most accomplished, most amazing brand person I know, Bill Replogle, helped me save a nonprofit 20 years ago. I got to know him, but he's worked for the biggest companies on the planet, and we actually got to him by asking our board of directors, one of the guys who was at WPP, one of the largest, brand companies on the planet, who do you think is the best on the planet? And he got us to Bill. Bill told me as we were doing the rebranding of this organization called Gifts in Kind International into good360.org, he said, we have to get this elevator pitch right. And he taught me something that I didn't know right before. You don't know when you get in the elevator if someone's going to go to the first floor or the 27th floor. You just don't know how much time you have with them. So I'm going to ask you, what is your first floor pitch? What's your second floor pitch? What's your third floor pitch? And we went through this for like weeks, right? But ultimately, it made a lot of sense when we're done. Write your paragraph, but make sure that all the meatier stuff that matters if you've got people's attention at their time, right? Make sure that stuff is, floor 15. But he really forced us to say, what is floor 1? What's your one sentence? Well, it's floor 2. You get one more sentence. Well, it's floor 3. You get one more sentence. And when you think about your pitch that way, I just think it's incredibly powerful. And I've done it ever since. It's been 20 years that I owe Bill for that. But I just really encourage people. It's really easy to ramble. It's really easy to talk a big story. But if you think of it that way, I don't know if the person sitting next to me in this elevator could be the biggest investor, the biggest customer, the biggest whatever in my life.
Yeah.
I just don't know if they're getting off on floor 2. What are you going to tell them?
And I think it's such a very literal and real thing that anyone can relate to, right? If you're not a brand expert or don't know anything about messaging, think about the layers of your story and like what's the thing that drives most impact quickly, and then how do you build that out if you spend more time with someone, which is exactly the framework that you have. And I think that segue back into paid media, thinking about how you tell those stories. And as human beings, like we're hardwired to remember stories. If you tell a story, and you're great at this in the sense of whether it's a pitch meeting for investment, whether it's a sales meeting, is like if you get to know someone and tell a story, like they'll remember that and connect to that a lot more than any data, facts. It doesn't matter how good they are. Like they're the things that you remember, and that's how you make an impression. So to make an impression at scale, it's not being shy to tell your brand story through paid media. It doesn't always have to drive a bottom line return on what you're doing. So I think that is really sort of sage advice for people to think about in when they're building out their brand and their products sort of side by side.
Well, and I also think something else you just said there, I just add a exclamation point to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is when you tell a story, but when you share it and there's conviction behind it, that's what people don't forget.
Yeah.
And, I'll give you a few examples for the audience. Like the studio, we raised capital, to do what we do. We were kind of anti-unicorn or bust mentality, which is where the market was 4 or 5 years ago. We're passionate about it. Like, we're not saying we can't build a company and sell it for $1 billion. Never going to say that. We believe that'll happen for us. Or saying that if you overcapitalize an early stage company, then the only outcome is a unicorn exit. And the likelihood of that is very, 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 very small. And we say it with conviction because I've been doing this for 27 years. And it comes across. We have 2 or 3 of our largest investors today in the studio are people who heard me say that 4 years ago. And they called back last year and they said, wow, everything you said was going to happen happened. Are you guys still raising money? So you have to be patient. I always say in sales, fundraising, whatever, just be true to who you are and trust that you're planting enough seeds that sometimes things come full circle, even though it's not something you can project in the sales funnel this week or the investment funnel this week. Just tell your truth and people will remember that. And we've certainly benefited from that and we'll continue to do that for the rest of our, journey here.
Yeah, amazing advice. And I think it's so true. And it's easy to get caught up in that. And I literally just shared a post today, which was some fresh PitchBook data that came out a couple of days ago. And they were looking at the number of unicorns globally. And of course, the peak of unicorn status happened in early 2021, which was the peak of VC investment in the last 10 years. So it's like overinflated valuations that are happening because of the investment that happened at that time. And now we're seeing a bunch of those businesses either go out of business or doing down rounds. Mm-hmm. So like the money that they had to spend all of a sudden is potentially burnt and they're disappeared. And I think that if you're thinking about how to build your brand to be sustainable long term, like going back to the foundations of building a brand and building revenue and making sure that like what you are doing gets you to a healthy point down the track, and trying to be pragmatic, but also quite functional in bottom line and how you spend.
Yeah, 100%. And this is probably not the right way to share this, but I'll share, one thing from my early career. When I was publicly traded, we had plenty of capital to acquire somebody. We were looking to acquire one particular firm that everybody else in our market was trying to acquire as well. And we were all high flying, stocks going great, whatever. We made this, and this company was only a year old. We just liked the team. We wanted them, but more as like competition. We didn't want anybody else to get them. We offered what we thought was a wildly crazy, awesome offer, right? 80% stock, 20% cash. The person was going to do really well. Everybody was going to do great. Yeah, and he was in California. We were based in Nevada. He flew out to meet us, literally to have a 10-minute conversation. And he said, I want you to know that if I were making a choice based on people and team and alignment, it'd be you. I have taken a different offer. I just wanted to tell you eyeball to eyeball because I really appreciate all the effort you made for this deal. And we're like, what do you mean? We can maybe match it, or we can. He's like, let's just say we offered him $1 and he said, they offered me 14 in cash. He said, cash in a suitcase. We're like, holy crap. What are you going to do next? He's like, my wife and I are buying a boat and we're going to sail around the world for the next 2 or 3 years. And it was just so like cutthroat. And I was like, wait, we're in the middle of this. Like, we're going to try to change this industry and this and that. And he was like, cash in a suitcase, brother. And I never forgot that, right? This was 25 years ago, but I never forgot. Like, at the end of the day, what I started to see happen with these valuations, and one of the things that, I always, I'm documented for saying, inspired me to create the studio, was I did decide that I wanted to figure out how to make the world a better place, make my boys proud, all those good things that are really my life purpose. But that year that I was writing the thesis for the studio 5 years ago, I met, like I always do, I meet founders. They want to raise money, or they want me to invest. They want me to be, an advisor or something. I had heard probably 8 of the 15 entrepreneurs I'd met will tell me they're going to be a unicorn in their space. They're so focused on valuation. It's so complicated. We can unpack this in a complete different session, right?
Yeah.
But valuation doesn't mean shit. Cash in a suitcase matters. Do you build a company that matters? Do you build a company that has revenue? Do you have cash in a suitcase? And valuation, has got a bitter side to it, right? If you don't get this right. And that's what you're saying about the unicorns. I think 80% of the unicorns right now are doing down rounds or laying people off.
Yeah.
That's brutal. I'll be blunt. That is fucking employees. That is screwing investors. It is not pretty. Doesn't matter if that company works in some day. It doesn't work for you as an investor. It didn't work for you as an employee. And so that's what made me really passionate about, like, I felt like I was looking around the room like, where are the adults? And then I realized it was me. I was like, oh crap, we're in trouble.
Yeah, and to build on that point, like Crunchbase data says that the average exit's 155 million, like give or take. So like from that sense, if that's what you're talking to, like understanding your business and not diluting your business, and we've gone off track a little from the paid media thing, but I think it goes down to understanding how you spend money sustainably, how you build momentum, how you get the right investment at the right time that has tangible outcomes, because evaluation is meaningless. There's no trophy that happens and you get presented by the president this special unicorn because your valuation, it's token, right? So I think being able to think about how you spend money, what return that drives, and the right point where investment comes in allow you to scale. You need to have foundational data on the media spend, on the product investment, on margins. There's a lot of parts to that. So I think we definitely should park it there because we are out of time today, but a very healthy topic to continue on the next episode. So if you're interested in learning more, visit nobodystudios.com. The URL is there on the screen. A good conversation with our Chief Nobody. Thanks for joining, and look forward to any comments, any more conversation. Mark and I are always available to unpack a little bit more. And if you're interested to learn about Nobody, hit that URL. Thank you.